Today's presentation is on defensible space. The speaker for CERT today is Marta Van Loan. Marta is an active member of Martinez area CERT and was instrumental with Judy Clark in establishing Martinez as a Firewise community in 2019. Marta's activities have included working with Contra Costa County Fire Protection District's Kathy Woofter and a team of 12 CERT volunteers to coordinate fire prevention and weed abatement surveys in the high fire zone along the Alhambra Ridgeline and into Alhambra Valley. 2021 will mark the 5th year Martinez CERT volunteers will survey properties and educate homeowners in the high fire prone areas on fire risk reduction and prevention. Hi, Marta.
Hi, Serenity. Thank you. As Serenity said, today's lunchtime lesson, and thank you for joining, is on defensible space. But before I get into that, we have a quick little poll, if you would do it, in terms of if you know anything about defensible space. And so here we have it. Do you know what defensible space is? And are you familiar with the fire department's weed abatement requirements? So if you could just take 20 seconds to answer those two questions, we'll get started.
Okay, we just have a few more people who haven't voted. If you can see the poll, please vote now.
There we go. Just a couple more.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and end polling.
Okay, thank you. So by the looks of the poll, 60% of you do know about defensible space and 40% of you say sort of. I love that answer, sort of. And in terms of being familiar with the fire department's abatement, 70% of you know about that and 30% don't. So that pleases me, that it seems to be that maybe over these last 4 years, we've made progress on this topic in the community. So let me see, how do we go down here? I'm not getting the next slide. Love technology. Serenity, you see the opening slide? Oh, here we go. Let's see. There we go. So what we want to talk about is making your home safe for the fire season. So all around your house are what we call ignition zones, IZs. And if you can see on this graphic on the right, this red zone is the immediate zone, and that's 0 to 5 feet from your house. So if you just extend your arms, that's how close this particular immediate zone is. And the intermediate zone runs out beyond that, out to 30 feet around your property. And the extended zone as much as 100 feet around your property. And each of these ignition zones have somewhat different requirements in terms of making yourself fire safe. So in terms of taking control of your wildfire risk in this immediate zone, let me remind you all that hot embers from these wildfires that we have, they can travel a significant distance. And if you think about the 2018 wildfires, that we had a fire in Vallejo, and the embers on the wind blew all across the Carquinez Strait and landed in Crockett and started a second fire. So we need to keep this in mind in terms of what you have right up next to your house if a burning ember falls into that area. So you want to limit the vegetation around the foundation of the house, clean the leaf debris off the rooftops, out of the gutters, under the roof tiles. You know, if you have those ceramic kind of Spanish motif tiles on your roof, right there at the gutter line is a great place for the little sparrows to build their nests in there. And so that is a wick to start the fire right up under your roof. So to clean the roof, the gutters, and around the tiles so that nothing gets in under the roof. And to seal the open areas, you know, we all have around our homes different places, some up under the pitched aspect of the roof. We have vents to vent the hot air out of your attic, and perhaps even around your foundation you may have some air vents. These are all small openings that you need to make sure they're clear of debris, and if they in some way need to be replaced or reinforced. This one on the firewood, it was, I think, 2 years ago, a woman asked me about it. Well, how convenient to have the stack of firewood right next to the house for those cold winter nights. But come spring and summer, that firewood next to the house is just waiting to ignite. Another thing we don't think too much about is using resistant construction materials. And to keep in mind, if you have a fence around your property or if you have a deck around your house and they're wood, it burns. And all you need is hot embers falling on that deck to bring a fire up front and close to your house. The intermediate zone, you want to selectively trim and prune the vegetation, you know, out to 30 feet away from the house, and try and preserve the natural beauty of the shrub or the plant or the tree, but remove the burnable vegetation. And this is particularly at the base of trees. I had a neighbor that had a lot of juniper shrub, and while the juniper itself doesn't burn easily, over the years the needles fall off and they are all under the branches of the shrub, never to be seen, of course, but it creates a huge fire hazard. All those dropped needles and dried needles under juniper bushes, under your pine trees, those sorts of things. And if you have non-irrigated vegetation, and native vegetation, but it's not irrigated, try and keep those to a height of 3 feet. And higher than that, and it runs the risk of putting burning embers up into the air and potentially getting close to your house. But you don't necessarily want to remove these plants. You know, the root systems prevent erosion. And other vegetation, if it's non-native, to really think about cutting that back to maybe 50% of what it is so that you have less flammable material. And this is interesting when the CERT fire survey teams go out and you see that people are doing their trimming and their weed whacking and their weed abatement, and then they just leave it there on the ground. They don't rake it up and remove it. And it should be, because it's dried, it's flammable, and it could bring more fire closer to your property. This last one about the mulch. This has been a little controversial in the Diablo Fire Safe Council meetings I've attended in other fire groups, because the chipped mulch can present a fire hazard, and should it be used? And one could argue either side of that issue, but the current recommendation is, yes, you can use it to keep other debris and weeds down, but not deeper than 6 inches deep on your mulch around your house. And perhaps you don't mulch right around the foundation, but you use the mulch for weed abatement purposes and to retain moisture in the soil around your plants as you get further and further out from the house. So this extended zone, This is you want to clean up within 30 feet of selected ornamental landscaping plants that are fire resistant and don't particularly ignite easily. And flammable vegetation, a safe distance. And the standard on this is 100 or more feet. So they've put the standard at 110 feet. Trees, trees, how to prune up your trees. And for me, this seems to be a never-ending process. And that, especially if you have large trees with beautiful canopies, but you don't want to have, from a fire risk reduction perspective, you don't want one massive canopy of trees where they all are touching each other. The fire just jumps from treetop to treetop to treetop. And to maintain the plants by removing the dead branches, the leaves, and the needles. And one of the things on removing the branches, well, how far do I have to remove them? And this is where we use the term a ladder fire. So the fire may start on the ground in shrub, and the flame can jump 6 to 8 feet high just on a fire on the ground. So if you're taking tree branches down, trim the tree branches up at least 8 feet off the ground. And this then helps with any grass fire that might be on the ground, not getting up into the trees, not getting up into the tree canopy, and jumping from tree to tree. And even though you may have fire-resistant plants, a buildup of the dead twigs, leaves, and branches defeat the purpose. And this is the example I spoke of on the previous slide of juniper shrubs. The shrub itself is fire-resistant, but all the needles that fall to the ground that you haven't raked up in God knows how many years, that needs a little bit of attention to keep that off the ground. And any other small ladder vegetation under the trees. You know, some things may grow well if you have pine trees, and acid-loving plants grow nicely under the pine tree. But again, be careful about whether any landscaping that you have under the trees, whether they could create the fire ladder going up into the tree. And one might ask how to keep the neighborhood safe. And so your safety depends on your neighbors. And if you live in the old downtown section of Martinez, like I do, there is a 5-foot setback from my neighbor's property line. So I can be cleaning up my property from now until when the cows come home. But if my neighbor doesn't do similarly, all my work is somewhat limited because the properties are so close together. So you really do need to take a more global view of this situation about not just your property, but the properties on either side of you. And a couple of things to think about in this regard in terms of your neighborhood. Maintain driveways and roadways that emergency vehicles can reach your home. And to clear the combustible vegetation 10 feet from the roads and driveways. And as I sit in my office here, I look out at what's across the street from me, and it is overgrowing the roadbed. And every couple of years, neighbors and I go and trim that up. It's city property, but it's my house, so, and my neighbors' homes. And so we take the initiative to trim back some of that brush across the street. And the overhanging tree branches above the road, the fire truck is 13.5 feet tall. So while the overarching trees may look lovely as you look down your street, Are they trimmed up high enough under the oak archway? Are they trimmed up high enough that the fire truck could get through? Could get through. And again, if you live in the older part of Martinez, this may be a problem in terms of how it was designed years and years ago. And to think about if there is an emergency, and it doesn't have to be just fire. It could be an earthquake. It could be some other disaster. Do you know 2 ways to exit your neighborhood? 2 ways to get out of your neighborhood. And if you live to the north side of the trestle, you may have limited exit options, but be familiar with that. So does it work? Here's some examples of people that in locations, a couple in Washington State in 2016, 2017, they cleaned up all around their properties, defensible space, and look at those 2 homes were saved. The bottom one in the center, bottom center, got pretty close there on the left-hand side, but the properties were saved. Marin County in 2017. And Marin is particularly woody. Marin County, you get out there in some of those smaller towns, and it's really imperative to clean up around your house. And then Lake Tahoe. So yes, it works. But it needs to be attended to continuously. And you may think, oh my God, there is so much to do. I'm never going to get this done. And I would say, think about this as tackling the job little by little, year by year. So maybe this year, you're going to concentrate on the immediate ignition zone, which is the 5 feet within your the 5-foot perimeter around your home, and just clean up and prune up those shrubberies, rake out from under them, and just start it piece by piece. Don't feel it's a job too big to tackle. If you're thinking about replacing your deck or your fencing, talk with your neighbor about shared fencing and what you might use that's non-flammable. They have some artificial woods now and other sorts of things. If it's time to paint the house, think about fire-resistant paint. There are lots of things that can be done little by little, year to year, over time. So in closing then, before we take any questions, let me leave you with this Diablo Fire Safe link in terms of landscaping and how your plants may stack up in the hierarchy of fire-resistant plants. So at this point, if anyone has questions, you can put your questions in the chat and Serenity can read those out and we'll see about answering them.
Thank you, Marta. So there is one question. It says, is there any kind of homeowner assistance available, like a chipping program, to help get rid of extra branches?
There is, through this Diablo Fire Safe Council, there is a program where if you get 5 or more neighbors together and you bring your brush and debris to the roadway, we can apply for money to bring in the chippers and chip it up and clean it up. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know. But it takes a minimum of 5 neighbors in order to apply for this money. And I'm happy to tell you my email address. It's martavanloan@yahoo.com. And if you're willing to talk with your neighbors and kind of pull that together, it's quite a short application. It's only 2 or 3 pages long. And the Diablo Fire Safe Council reviews these throughout the year, and to help with this sort of thing. And one thing, while I think of it now, for all of you that are on the line, there is the fire prevention district has a deadline for when the weed abatement needs to be done. And I was just meeting with Kathy Woofter yesterday and asked her when the spring deadline would be this year. Her response was, it depends on whether we get rain in March or not, because if we have limited rain in March, that means the fire season will start earlier, and the deadline for your yard cleanup could be as early as mid-April. If we get decent rain in March, it may get postponed until mid-May. So it's this early springtime period to keep in mind to start your yard cleanup.
Okay, and we do have a few more questions. One is, I'm interested in replacing my 1/4 inch vents, soffit, and foundation to ones that are more fire secure. How do you do this? Are replacement vents available to switch out, or do I hire a roof contractor?
If you're not going to do it yourself, I guess you need a roof contractor to do it. And I think if you go to this Diablo Fire Safe website, you can find lots of information on these different topics in terms of what these would be. You know, in my house is 85 years old. And so the vents up under the pitch of the roof to vent the attic, those are wooden slats. You know, so at some point, I guess I should replace those with metal vents. But I would say use the Diablo Fire Safe website to get a lot of this sort of information.
Great, thank you. And here's another question. In San Ramon and the new zone building, mostly houses are built very closer with their neighborhood. I'm sorry. Who is responsible when these houses are built close together? Because it's very dangerous if there's a fire.
Then you need to take that up with the San Ramon Planning Commission, that they approved such close properties without sufficient setback between the properties. And you're speaking about in new neighborhoods, correct? Not an old neighborhood like mine. And so, yeah, it's all about getting more dense housing, so there's more housing available, but it comes at a risk of increasing the fire hazard. So I would say the Planning Commission and the zoning laws control that.
Okay, and then there's another question here. Can you repeat where the wildfire zone is in Martinez?
We're a zone 1 fire hazard, and it runs from downtown all along Barralesa and Alhambra Avenue, all on that ridge line, the Alhambra Hills, all behind the high school and the hospital, all the way down to the John Muir House. And it also runs out to Alhambra Valley Road, out into the country areas. But that's the fire, that's the zone 1 fire risk. But wherever you live, you don't have to be in a zone 1 fire risk, because these embers are going to fly. And so regardless of where you live, you should be attentive to reducing the risk around your house and around your neighbors.
Okay, and another question is, where can we see the evacuation maps for Martinez?
I only know, well, in fact, I was just looking at the evacuation plan this morning, and there is an overall arching map, and it's supposed to be interactive. If you click on your neighborhood, it should show you. But this morning when I was doing it, it did not work. And that's on the city website in the police department. So if you go to cityofmartinez.org and police department, and then query emergency plan, it'll show you that map, but it doesn't, for me, it wasn't interactive this morning. And so I don't know that they have a lot of established evacuation routes. And this is something, you know, not just for Martinez, but for wherever you live, you should ask your police and fire departments, do they have evacuation maps? And how do you find them? And to know what your routes are. We're trying to do that here in Martinez through CERT, and to get the city council to be a little more attentive to this issue.
Okay, and there was actually another question about a different city for Hercules, the fire zone in Hercules. So would that be found in a similar area on the Hercules page?
Hercules has their own police department, but maybe county fire. I don't know. In Martinez, we have a police department that's responsible for the emergency plans for the city, because we don't have a Martinez fire department. We use Contra Costa County Fire. So our emergency plan is under the chief of police. So it depends on your city and whether you have both police and fire departments or only police, then that's probably where you would find your emergency plan.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And looks like that's the end of our questions in our chat.
Very good.
Thank you again, Marta, for this important information.
Thank you.